Transformers Cyberverse Season 2 is here. In fact, it's been here since September. When the first season ended, I was borderline disappointed, but hopeful for the future. I saw a massive amount of potential, but not all of the potential was met. Too often, the show didn't give us a reason to care about things. There were too many useless characters. Bumblebee's radio voice made me want to drop a radio into the bathtub with me in it. But Cyberverse's first season clearly showed a love for and understanding of the source material on behalf of Randolph Hurd's writer's room, and a distinct effort to make a Transformers show as best as it can be. And I got the feeling that Cyberverse was merely finding its footing, but had a wonderful future in store for it. Yes, it did. Almost immediately, I was completely enthralled in the second chapter of this show, and it is one of the most engaging seasons of Transformers storytelling in the history of the franchise, or at least recent memory. I've been wanting to talk about this for a while. Without further ado, here is a random nobody on the internet's thoughts on a season of an obscure children's cartoon that ended several months ago.
That's number 3 on this week's Top Robot Fails.
Sea of Tranquility wasn't a great start to the season. Apparently taking place 10 years after the first, the cold open of the season immediately destroys my theory that Megatron died between the flashbacks and the present day. Okay, fine, I was wrong, but he did not appear in the present at all in Season 1. The Season 2 premiere felt like a Season 1 episode. We were thrown into a giant battle to save the moon with absolutely no setup and immediately expected to care about the Decepticon plan. Humanity learns of the Transformers' existence. And while it's a funny scene, the rest of the season proves that there is absolutely no point. Humans never appear again. Outside of 2 news broadcasts made to the humans throughout the season, they have absolutely no presence in the duration of the story. Cyberverse seems dedicated to tell a Transformers story without humans at all, but that raises the question, why partially include them but not fully? Why set the story on Earth if humans don't matter? But what did I appreciate, you ask? What did I appreciate so much? Bumblebee speaks again. His radio voice is gone, and I love that! Jeremy Levy is a fantastic Bumblebee, and he deserves the opportunity to depict the character as much as possible. The episode ends with Megatron demoting Starscream and replacing him with the largely incompetent Slipstream. Starscream yells that it's never over, and my reaction upon seeing this... okay... I walked away from Season 2, Episode 1, worried that it would be another messy, mixed bag like the first. But then one scene made all those worries go away.
Megatron?
Starscream endures the most visceral on-screen beating of any and all incarnations of the character. It's a brutal scene, it's a scary scene, and it's a legitimately well-done scene. It's not graphic or gory, but it doesn't need to be. It more than gets the point across. It immediately changed my perception of not only the season, but the show as a whole. Let's back up. The episode immediately sets up the Decepticons' actual motivations for attacking the moon, to crash the celestial body into the Earth itself, using rockets on the dark side of the moon. Megatron powers through his injuries, ordering the Decepticons around, but Starscream immediately takes advantage of Megatron's weakened state to attack him and take command, only to prove immediately incompetent.
And someone tell me what these little buttons do!
Starscream has a great non-verbal confrontation with Soundwave, but will someone please tell me why every single character in the entire show is the exact same height? The character designs are great, especially rendered in 2D, but I wish there was a height variation. I loved seeing our 4 main Autobot leads from Season 1 fighting side by side for the first time, although the main cast does expand in the second season to include Hot Rod and Cheetor. Grimlock kind of takes the back seat later on. One thing I could have done without is the Team 2 sequence. Lackluster action scene, they were obviously going to succeed, and that's not how rockets work. That would have just ripped the rockets off. They would have had to have rockets on the other side of the moon, push the moon back, whatever. Still a huge fan of this episode. I showed this to everybody when it came out, and I was immediately on board for whatever Season 2 had to present. But I knew Starscream was not dead though, considering he's in every trailer, and literally the main overarching figure in the title sequence.
What I saw was yellow with black spots.
Ooh, this fits your description. You saw a banana.
No.
Episode 3 feels like a G1 episode. Some of the background Autobots get time to shine, such as Ratchet, Prowl, Rack and Ruin, making them feel like actual recurring characters rather than just an afterthought or a fan service. This particular installment sees Grimlock consume Wheeljack's hyperfuel and go on a rampage as things rapidly escalate. After super speed, he becomes magnetized. Theoretically, he should have been magnetized to the floor, whatever. Then, to nullify his magnification, Wheeljack opens a black hole, everyone's getting sucked in, then the episode just ends, because Optimus nonchalantly traps the black hole in a force field, and the situation resolves itself. Once again, 11 minutes is just too short for these episodes, because they don't really have time to explore their ideas. They're all very anticlimactic, but the show is clearly improving its understanding of how to utilize these limited runtimes. Think about Season 1 episodes, Megatron Must Be My Hero, or Terminal Velocity, that had like 22 minutes worth of stuff all crammed into just half of that. It's really getting better. Teletran X assumes a recurring role in the same vein as Teletran 1, and that's something I actually wished would happen in my Chapter 1 review, so I'm really glad they took that direction, because he became pretty overused in Season 1. Someone has described this show as getting the tone of G1 correct, which is local rowdy kids get encouraged by their dads to annoy each other as much as possible. And that's not inaccurate. It's distinctly a kid show, but it's one that has fun ideas and passionate creators. Sure, characters getting magnetized together has been done before, but this takes that idea and puts it into a new light.
I hope I get a second optic.
Oh, Clobber, you don't need that. You look great.
Bludgeon! Megatron's speech at the very beginning of the episode shows off the manipulative side of the character, which is something that hasn't really been shown since animated. Here, Mark Thompson hams up the performance and continues to make a strong case for himself to take over the voicing of the character for many animated projects in the future. Speaking of animated, Lockdown and Lugnut debut. Technically, this isn't Lugnut, this is a different character named Clobber. I think they should have just gender swapped Lugnut, because they already did so for Nova Storm and Acid Storm. Lugnut doesn't inherently need to be a male character, but whatever. Lockdown, outside of appearance, has nothing in common with animated Lockdown. He somehow manages to have less in common with TFA than Age of Extinction Lockdown, which I didn't think was possible. But this doesn't bother me because it's just a fun version of the character. It would have been nice if they made this Blitzwing or some other traditionally known Decepticon subordinate, but at the end of the day, not a big deal. A rivalry between Soundwave and Shockwave is introduced, which is a concept that I've always wanted to see play out. Not much is done with it outside of a single scene of confrontation, and it's never brought up again for the duration of the season, which raises the question of why it needed to be featured in the first place. Bludgeon! Slipstream starts to come around as a character when she's the protagonist of a story versus the antagonist, which is something that first became noticeable in Siloed. She's the newly appointed secret commander, and yet none of them obey her commands or respect her, following another unknown source's orders. Very predictably Starscream. Rodimus's interrogation is just a perfect Transformer scene, as Megatron's ego prompts him to taunt Optimus, only for Rodimus to take advantage of the Decepticon's incompetence and escape in front of Optimus. In the end, both the Autobots and Decepticons become aware of the Moon Cheetah and his Ground Bridge portals, moving Season 2's story along at a very steady pace, unlike Season 1, which tended to meander at points, which is not a bad thing. Bludgeon!
The ALLSPARK is mine. That cannot be.
Optimus and Megatron's relationship is not well fleshed out in this show. Megatron as my hero merely stated that I have ideological differences, but gave absolutely no indication as to what those differences are in the Cyberverse continuity and why they are fighting in the first place. However, when Cheetor proposes knowledge trials, Optimus Prime and Megatron know almost nothing about each other, and it's a genuinely great moment.
Before you met Optimus Prime, he was a file clerk. What files was he in charge of?
Who cares?
In his most famous victory, who did he defeat?
I I am not certain.
The season starts to establish this tone that the characters need to get to know each other and that the conflict is so pointless, and it recurs several times and gets some great subtextual explorations throughout the season. Cheetor's purpose is vague. Was he created after the ALLSPARK's arrival on Earth? Why is the ALLSPARK okay with Optimus and Megatron brutally fighting each other? Cheetor is a pretty awful guardian, which we'll see many times throughout the season. He just stood there and watched as STARSCREAM'S steals the ALLSPARK. Optimus or Megatron could have been out of here by now, and I'm surprised that Megatron didn't try this.
The ALLSPARK is like the ALLSPARK.
Ah, yes, of course. It would be very similar to itself, I imagine.
Cheetor introduces himself as a neutral, universal being. In explaining his backstory raises more question than is answered. Why did the ALLSPARK choose a cheetah body for him specifically? And he expresses to Optimus the pointlessness of this conflict, and even Optimus annoys this.
Always fighting one another. I hoped that you would settle your differences so I could bring you to the ALLSPARK.
And now Megatron has the ALLSPARK.
Cyberverse's Optimus' whole thing has been that he regrets the role he played in the fall of Cybertron and wants to restore the planet he helped destroy.
Cybertron is dying. I never should have sent the ALLSPARK away from Cybertron. I felt there was no choice. But I was wrong. There is still time to set things right.
Yet he fails to see that peace needs to be made with the enemy in order for this to happen. That's his fatal flaw. Cyberverse Optimus is actually a really great take on the character. He's simple, but he still has a lot of nuances for a show that's clearly aimed for kids. The show definitely struggles with dialogue though, especially with Optimus' dialogue.
And his wishes are not good.
Slipstream realizes Starscream's insanity and tries to speak reason to the Seekers that she once commanded. However, her words fall onto deaf ears. Why exactly are the Seekers so loyal to Starscream, who's completely unstable and yells at them? I don't know. We never really saw them interact with him in Season 1 aside of a flashback, but these are kind of nothing characters within the context of TFC, so it's not something to get hung over.
We should have talked like this ages ago, Prime. So much history between us. And yet so little trust. As the Earthlings would say, trust is a two-way street, Megatron. Most roads on Cybertron are one way.
PARLEY is my favorite episode of the season. The Autobots and Decepticons attempt to negotiate peace. Featuring a flashback to McAdams, the episode establishes a dire need for the negotiations to succeed. However, this has apparently happened before.
Actually, they do this pretty often. Every couple thousand cycles or so.
Yeah, and it always goes the same way.
Scraplets have been reinvented as feral beasts, ancient Cybertronians of the past reincarnated in these mindless shells. I don't fully understand the point of this occurring, but it certainly plays into Starscream's intimidation factor. The negotiations begin to go well, and the episode establishes a very hopeful tone that the negotiations will succeed. The Autobots and Decepticons get along, as they did before the war. The season was even advertised as Autobots and Decepticons working together to defeat Starscream. Slipstream struggles to find someone who will speak to her. In her first appearance in the show, she says to Windblade,
I think it's time you and I had a talk.
Here, in her final appearance, she seeks out her mortal enemy and actually desires to have a talk.
Windblade, we need to talk.
That's not exactly what you and I do.
I need someone to listen to me.
Bludgeon! For reasons which are vague, though I assume it's because he considers her a traitor, murders Slipstream in cold blood as soon as Windblade is willing to listen. A full-out firefight ensues, and the negotiations fall through. The peace-talking ground is turned into a battlefield, and nothing has changed, and both teams are now working independently to achieve the same goal. It drives home the theme that there's no real point to them fighting in this continuity. They're only fighting because it's established as being the norm, and it's just a great commentary.
Ion says he's very disappointed in you, Optimus. He wants the Matrix of Leadership back. Now!
Windblade has had much less to do this season, due to the spotlight being spread between Hot Rod and Cheetor as well. The gang goes on a rescue mission to the Decepticon warship, where Starscream's Scraplets have drained the crew's energon like a vampire. There's a well-created atmosphere through the visuals and the music, It's all a trap though, as Starscream just wanted Optimus Prime to arrive so that he could steal the Matrix. Why didn't he just go straight to the Ark? I'm not sure. Maybe it's just easier for him to access the Nemesis given his familiarity with it, but you'd think they'd have changed some security codes to prevent his access, or Starscream could have just used his unlimited ALLSPARK power, more powerful than that of Cheetor, to access the Ark, as we see Skybite do later in the season. Whatever. Starscream claims that Alpha Trion is speaking to him as a scraplet, and he was established as a mentor of Optimus in Season 1, and it's a scary scene. You actually worry about Starscream getting the Matrix, because this show has not been pulling its punches this season. It's no Transformers Prime killing Cliffjumper in Episode 1, but it's also a far cry from RID 2015, where nothing had lasting consequences and the same story is repeated for 3 seasons.
You have something stuck on your face.
Flashbacks to Season 1 show that Cheetor was present the entire time.
They continue to fight. I hope that they settle their differences so that one day we may take our place among them.
Cheetor struggles to find his place on the team, burning through all the incidental Autobots, and Bumblebee invites him on a scouting mission. Jeremy Levy's portrayal of Bumblebee mentoring Cheetor is, as always, just very, very good. Obviously, I prefer Dan Gilvezan to come back as Bumblebee, but once that's no longer on the table, Jeremy Levy all the way. When the Secrets attack, a chase ensues through several time zones, aka reused sets from the first season, and the duo is captured by Starscream. However, quick thinking using plot devices established earlier in the episode saves the day. It's a very low-key filler episode, letting us get to know Cheetor as a person, rather than just the exposition stream that the previous episodes have provided. He's mostly incompetent, but he's just really lovable, and so you kind of overlook it.
Fuser. Energon clamp. Blaster. Wow, didn't think that would work.
Wheel junk. This is a Wheeljack. Wheeljack reluctantly teams up with Shockwave to track Starscream through the scraplets, but Wheeljack uses his wits to escape capture, and Shockwave manages to find a way to control the scraplets at the end. Both of these characters, who I am massive fans of, get to shine a lot. This is my second favorite Wheeljack of the entire franchise, behind G1. The only thing that could have made it better is if he sounded more like Chris Latta, and every time he spoke, blue lights on the side of his head flashed. But I won't complain. This is a really great, loyal adaptation of Wheeljack. Windblade's desire to avenge Slipstream actually works pretty well for me. She has a great fight with Bludgeon, the other sword wielder of the series, and the episode ends with Bludgeon floating away to space. I wish that the character got to do more, and I wish his motivations were more clearly established, but I'm just so overjoyed by the fact that we got an on-screen Bludgeon portrayed respectfully and accurately to the comics that I don't have any real complaints.
Explosions, dancing, landscapes melt in my fury. Jetfire, I destroy.
Infinite Vendetta is just the same episode occurring twice in a row, once with Jetfire and once with Skybite, making his first television appearance since 2002. It's not particularly engaging when you can always predict the next scene. The rivalry between Skybite and Jetfire isn't really elaborated on outside of them constantly stating their disdain for one another. Megatron chooses 2 competitors to meet at a gladiatorial arena. The fight isn't revolutionary, none of the action in Cyberverse has really blown me away at all, but Skybite's haiku reading got a cheer out of me, and he was a very, very entertaining character. At this point in the season, it became abundantly clear that poor Shadow Striker, after being heavily promoted and well set up in Season 1 as Bumblebee's primary adversary, has no real stake in the story this season whatsoever. I like her, I hope she gets to do more in the future. Ultimately, this episode doesn't further the story of the season. Sure, the Autobots and Decepticons find out Starscream's location, but they didn't have to introduce new characters for that to happen. It's just strangely out of place. Jetfire has a good arc when he chooses to save Optimus rather than kill Skybite when he's at his mercy, but there's no reason this couldn't have been given to any of the other characters who still needed fleshing out. But again, this story's been moving so fast, and the writers have been doing a really good job with the characters and with the story. Let's give them this one. It was fun to see Skybite.
You know what would make me happy? Stomping on your brain module.
Starscream gains the power of the ALLSPARK, clearly ripping off my obscure, hand-drawn internet fanfiction from 2018. I'm pressing charges. He then kills all of the Seekers. Dang! Thundercracker was the only character amongst these to actually have a personality, and he's the only one I'm sad to see go, but the sadness mostly just derives from the fact that we'll have to wait longer to see an IDW-inspired version of the character on screen. It's not really anything Cyberverse did with the character specifically to make me sad. Starscream's speeches are great.
After countless millennia of pointless conflict, you will now be liberated. Be happy. No, this is the part where you beg for my forgiveness.
Why should I? You are Starscream. You will fail. You always have, and you always will.
This is it. A cosmically powered Starscream. No one's safe, and yet Starscream, as Megatron points out, uses his power completely ineffectively, only freezing and taunting those under his control, rather than executing them, which is his plan. Starscream's incompetence gets his ultimate power ripped away from him, and Optimus is on the brink of death. Will he make it? Yes, because there's more shots of him in the trailer that haven't happened yet. The season practically ends at this point, leaving the last 6 episodes to take their time and tell fun, smaller scale stories to set up the 3rd season.
You see that? I got him!
Ripping off Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2 for the 2nd time, Cyberverse sees the Autobots have to use fake shuttles to trick the Decepticons and escape from Earth, introducing a character named Red 5. Transformers references Star Wars all the time, but why has Star Wars never referenced Transformers? I think like once there's a space station called Starscream in some book. You know, they should do it more. It's the least they can do. Transformers are cool. After a good scene with Alpha Trion, Optimus survives the experience of dying like it was nothing, making me think that it really shouldn't have happened. Starscream has the idea to use the ALLSPARK to escape a Decepticon ambush. Not Cheetor, the actual guardian of the ALLSPARK, proving that Cheetor, while a great guy, really isn't the most qualified person to guard it. And clearly, the sentient ALLSPARK itself sides with the Autobots. At the end, Shockwave uses a hard light hologram, which is cleverly re-established in Secret Science, to trick the Autobots into missing their space bridge and going to Cybertron the long way, allowing the last third of the season to take its time.
What do you think, Optimus?
I think it is quite circular.
It was a really good episode. It pulls from and reinvents many Transformers concepts, such as Prime's Don't Party from Transformers Prime, the Hate Plague from G1, and Prime's Log, and Teletran X's fascination with polka music from previous episodes of Cyberverse. It's a great Optimus-centric episode with some great quiet moments and a unique pairing of characters, which ends in Optimus practicing his Truck Daddy dance moves to much avail. It's well-paced, well-written. There's not much to say about it because everything just works.
You must not fight one another. You are one people. You even look alike.
We don't look alike.
What are you, colorblind?
The 3 most infamous kid appeal characters from the history of the franchise team up to go space surfing. All that was missing was Hotshot. You know, this show is beautiful looking, by the way, and this episode really showcases that. The gang gets separated, and each becomes inducted into a separate clan of Sharkticons. Unlike Infinite Vendetta, this episode doesn't have the same storyline occurring 3 separate times consecutively. It just gives us enough credit as an audience to understand that the same thing that happened to Cheetor happened to Bumblebee and Hot Rod as well. Once again, Cheetor tries to prove that war and fighting is pointless, and leads these rival gangs to immediately team up, and just like that, try to defeat the Autobots. But then Cheetor restores their planet, and they all live happily ever after. The episode's too short. We get no sense of their cultures, or the basis of the differences, or why their planet was destroyed, but like, it was just fun, you know? And if you walk away from an episode entertained, you're more willing to look over the flaws, which has been the case for so much of this season, and not so much the case for the first season.
I had infinite power. My enemies on their knees. And now it's all gone.
And how does that make you feel?
How do you think that makes me feel?
I'm sorry, our time is up. Hold that thought for our next session.
A possessed Windblade steals the ALLSPARK. Cheetor does not notice at all, because of course he doesn't. This leads Optimus, Bumblebee, Hot Rod, and Cheetor to follow an overly aggressive and hostile Windblade to the most beautiful setting in the entire history of the show. Watch this episode for the visuals alone. The 2D flashbacks are great, the Titans look fantastic, everything's great. It doesn't have the same level of detail as Prime, but it has a really, really great art direction, and normally I hate 3D animation. I prefer 2D because I think there's more artistic expression available, but no, this episode proves that 3D animation can be just as beautiful as 2D. Croatan, the Titan, is named after the disappeared Roanoke colony, who mysteriously left no trace of their existence outside of the word Croatan carved into a tree, and similarly, Croatan's people have gone missing. At the end, the Titan turns out to be a totally cool guy, so Windblade's aggressive behavior makes no sense. However, her city speaker ability is finally elaborated on after being casually name-dropped in the second episode of the show with no further explanation. Meanwhile, Starscream's in therapy, and it's hilarious. Teletran X breaks down that he just desires for people to trust him, and I wish more had been done with that. If these episodes were more than 11 minutes, they probably would have. He winds up tagged along with Croatan for the ride, and Randolph has implied that more Titans will appear in the future, so we know what role Starscream's gonna play in the future of the show.
We need to reboot the power and raise the shields immediately.
We know!
That's what we were trying to...
Grimlock and RC take forefront for another low-key episode as the Autobots glide through space. It's a fun adventure, and once again, Cyberverse feels so much like G1 in the sense that any member of the expansive cast could lead any given episode. The show's not tethered to its leads. Their camaraderie is great, I love finally exploring RC, and the episode culminates as the two of them pull a Hawkeye/Black Widow and try to kill themselves before the other kills themselves, to sacrifice. It's pretty sudden, we didn't really get to know them well before jumping into this, but it doesn't play too seriously, so it's not all that egregious.
Wheeljack thinks it's possible. So does my Wheeljack. My Wheeljack agrees. Mine as well. And mine.
Our Wheeljack thinks so too.
My Wheeljack... Yes, all the Wheeljacks agree. We will pool the energy of all our ALLSPARKs. That's what I was going to say.
Reading the episode premise for this, I was really hoping it would be Shattered Glass. So all of my disappointment from this episode comes from my own preconceived expectations and hopes, not the actual quality of the story itself. Trapped in unspace, Cyberverse actually adapts the storyline from more than meets the eye, as the ship rapidly disappears around the characters. Multiple other arcs arrive, one captained by Rack and Ruin, and the combined power of an army of Wheeljacks get the team to escape. The arc returns to Cybertron, where the Decepticons are waiting. It's a solid episode, and a surprisingly tame way to cap off one of the most just insane seasons of a Transformers show in recent memory. I spent a lot of time critiquing the season, but back during season 1, I spent almost an hour talking about the things that they didn't really do right. Here, it's way less time, because when something isn't done perfectly, there's much more to say about it, analyzing the source of the media not functioning on all cylinders. But here, so much of Cyberverse Season 2 is done correctly, and when it's done right, it really speaks for itself. There's nothing I can say about it that the episode doesn't already speak. There's not overly complex characters, there's no powerful dramatic reveals, you won't see RC discovering the Starscream killed Cliffjumper after a season of build-up, or Ratchet putting Omega Supreme to rest. The show doesn't need it. Chapter 1 tried to have some big dramatic moments, and it didn't always succeed, but the second season learned from that, and decided to focus on having fun. So when dramatic moments like Slipstream's death occurred sparingly, they had real impact. I was actually pretty sad to see Slipstream go, but I wouldn't have cared at all if she died in the first season. I know it's not perfect, but perfection doesn't exist. Besides the Mandalorian. That's perfection. Look, it's the guy who played Nanosec.
Where to?
I was just invested as soon as Starscream got beat up all the way through, and I was initially worried that this would be it because there wasn't any word about the show being greenlit for renewal, but in late September, Cyberverse was confirmed to get 26 more episodes, totaling 1 season and a TV movie. The show could last for much longer than that too. Bring it on, because the art style and reverence for the lore and the franchise have won me over. I still want to know what exactly a Cyberverse is, though. the title still doesn't have a meaning.